We continue our chapter on sexual and romantic relationships. Last week, we focused rather extensively on short-term and casual relationships. My intent this week is we're going to start taking that transition from short-term to long-term. How do we get from a casual sexual relationship into something that is more connected, has commitment, that may have higher levels of intimacy between people? What do those steps look like, and what are some of the psychological and physiological processes that lead to long-term love or long-term relationships? We'll start by talking about two things that are involved in this stepwise process: flirting and love. Now, flirting is something that certainly occurs in a short-term context as well, but there are aspects of flirting that I think that you should be aware of to help you to establish the kind of relationship that you are looking for. So you can flirt with the intent of a short-term acquaintance and also flirt with the intention of building a long-term relationship. And how to go about that is going to be different depending on those goals. So let's look at flirting. Why do we do it? Why do we have this habit of, when we find someone we enjoy, someone who is attractive to us, do we want to be around them? First of all, which is something you need to do to flirt, but then also in some ways communicate with them in a way that expresses something about ourselves that we think is going to be funny or entertaining or attractive in some way. Well, what we know from research on flirting is that, first off, even without research, we can determine that flirting is something that people do to signal interest. Well, if you're attracted to someone, nothing's really going to happen unless you put yourself out there. You actually say, hey, listen, by the way, I want to be near you, I want to talk to you, I want to have this experience with you. So really predominantly it's there to signal interest. But the part that gives people the most anxiety, and it's the part that you need to focus on as you are trying to determine how to flirt with someone, is that the other person will use flirting attempts to assess a potential partner. So they'll use it to assess something about that person. Well, imagine what that looks like. Often flirting can involve some level of humor. For example, that is, you strike up a conversation and then you try to make the other person laugh. You try to put someone at ease. Well, what does that say about you if you are capable of being funny while you flirt, while you're interacting with someone for the first time? Well, if you're funny, you often need to be happy, or at least mentally healthy, to find humor in life. You need to be intelligent and creative enough to be funny. And so as you are being funny, as you're having this conversation, what you are also doing is you are demonstrating qualities about yourself that you would want to communicate to the other person. For anyone who gets nervous about flirting, for approaching someone they're attracted to, I would keep this in mind. Think about what you want from this interaction with the other person. If it's something more short-term, if it's something that potentially could be just sexual, you may want to emphasize kind of highlighting aspects of yourself that would be attractive in a short-term partner for casual sex. Dancing with another person can be a form of flirtation. Dancing with someone or physically interacting with someone. Certainly, there's a fine line between physically flirting with someone in a creepy way where you're touching them too much, and in an appropriate way where there's contact made and then you judge whether that contact is desired or not. But that might be more appropriate for short term. Versus long term, you might want to share information about yourself. If this is something that you could perceive going somewhere, maybe communicate what your dreams are, what your interests are, the kinds of things that would be important for establishing a long-term, potentially lifetime partnership. And so those might be more effective for flirting. So this is something just at least to keep in mind, that flirting is not something that just signals interest. It's there to demonstrate some quality about yourself. And so you want to flirt in a way that really puts your best foot forward. So how do you know that flirting is happening? Well, it's really hard. It's tough to know because there's always some level of ambiguity. Is that touch flirtation, or is that touch really just someone growing up in a culture where touching other people is common and it is friendliness? We don't know. And this really does seem to be a feature of human flirting, is that it is ambiguous. There's always some amount of plausible deniability that if things go south or this person ends up not being someone you really want to continue to interact with, you want to be able to exit that situation. You want to be able to say, oh, no, I wasn't actually flirting with you, when perhaps at first you were interested and then you changed your mind once you learned more about them. I want to highlight one study here by Ranganath and colleagues from published in 2009, where they actually tried to develop an algorithm to detect flirtation. So that is, an algorithm is a mathematical formula where you can feed in different variables, different aspects of a situation, and then based on those variables, you can make a prediction about something. So what they did was they made an algorithm and fed data from speed dating events. So those of you who are not familiar, speed dating is when people get together within a room of, say, 20 plus people. They then sit. People are sat one-on-one with one another at certain tables, and they might get 2 to 3 minutes to interact with each other. Then they get up and they have to switch partners, and they talk to a new person for 2 to 3. And so the idea is, within, say, the span of an hour, you've met 20 different people, and then you can say, oh, you know what? I really like these people. I want to follow up with these people in the future. Well, they analyzed speech data from speed dating events, and they tried to predict whether people could accurately identify flirtation versus how well their algorithm could detect flirtation. And the algorithm ended up detecting flirtation at a greater accuracy than people could. That is, people seem to be very bad at identifying flirtation, but if you really break it down into its component aspects, you tend to have more accuracy. But even then, you only have about a 71% accuracy chance. So if you have trouble identifying whether someone's flirting with you, you're not alone. So the algorithm tended to be more accurate than human listeners were at detecting whether flirtation was real or not. There's a study done by, this is actually my advisor from my master's degree, who looked at how men and women tend to respond to flirtation and what types of flirting tend to be most effective. Well, when you think about sex differences between men and women, a lot of this seems to make sense. Men tend to respond to signals of sexual receptivity. So to the extent that men are, in many ways, thinking about sex and they want someone who is also interested in sex, for a woman to flirt through sexual receptivity, physical touching, or perhaps even revealing an interest in having sex, men tend to rate those types of flirting as most effective. Whereas women tend to respond to signals of commitment, exclusivity, investment, willingness to invest, generosity. That is, if you put something forth about yourself that indicates your willingness, potentially, maybe not dedication to, but willingness to engage in a long-term partnership, women are more likely to perceive those as effective. Now, for both men and women, though, the types of flirtation that were rated the highest were things like sincerity, that is just being honest, being true to yourself, putting yourself forward in a way that is not deceptive or lying. Being positive, that is not self-deprecating too much, not speaking ill of anyone, just seeming like you have something to say, and it's not denigrating towards anyone, it's not insulting anyone else. So being positive, being upbeat, and then just showing interest in the other person, like it's clear that you want to be around them. Some people, I think, have this misconception that you should behave in a way around someone that makes them chase you, that it's not clear to them whether you like them or not. And in certain situations that can be helpful, but predominantly for most people, if you show that you're interested in them, that's a clear signal to them that if they reciprocate, if they also demonstrate interest in you, that you are likely to show it back. People don't want to put themselves out on a branch. They don't want to take that risk. So if you can help them to feel comfortable in flirting back with you by showing that interest, it tends to go over very well. This is flirting. Just a bit of information I hope that you find somewhat useful. Okay, well, let's now say that you've flirted in a way, that you've established some kind of relationship, and you've decided that you're really looking for a long-term relationship. What are the building blocks of a long-term relationship? I think most people would immediately go to love. That is, a long-term relationship is going to be defined by this intense, deeply affectionate feeling that you can hold towards another person. The problem is, it's really hard to define what love is. What is love? An entire song is dedicated to it. One model of love that is very popular, I find it useful to some degree, is Sternberg's triarchic theory of love, which attempts to describe three different components of love, or types of love. Sternberg described passion, intimacy, and commitment, where passion refers to that overwhelming desire for another person. When you first meet them, you have that new relationship energy where you obsess about them, you want to be around them, you want to touch them, kiss them, physically interact with them. It's that almost physical addiction to another person. That would be passion. And that is a certain type of love, which can be separate from intimacy, which is a sense of connectedness or shared goals, such that you agree with this person, hey, I enjoy these kinds of hobbies. I like going out to dance clubs. I enjoy sitting at home and watching Netflix, and then sharing information about yourself to one another, things about your family, things about your life goals, what you want to accomplish, where you want to live, things like that. So having that sense of connectedness, shared goals. And then it can be separate from commitment, which is really how much you trust another person, how much you may mutually care for them, or that you are dedicated to them. You don't wish to see harm fall upon them. Now, what's useful about this theory of love is that each of these elements are separable. They're different. And when you're talking about a long-term relationship, you can have different combinations of them. Oh, add that there. So if at the very top here, these are triangles representing the different types of love that can exist if you just have, depending on which combinations of love you have. Now at the very top, we have what would be called consummate love, the ultimate love. I don't know if I necessarily like that, but it certainly includes all three elements, where you feel that passion towards someone, you're intimate with them, and you have a dedication to them. You're committed to them. But you can have these independently. If you just feel intimacy towards someone, that is what you'd probably consider liking, right? This is probably what you feel towards most of your friends. You have shared interests. You may even have shared goals. But you wouldn't necessarily feel that intense passion, or maybe you're not even that very committed, dedicated to their well-being, but at least you kind of share those aspects. Infatuation would be just if you have passion, right? That is, you want to be around them, you love them, but maybe you don't really want to share much about yourself with them, or if push came to shove, you wouldn't be there for them if, shit hit the fan, etc. So that would just be that passion component. Versus just commitment would be something like empty love. You don't really feel passionate, and you're not even really close to the person. But you do want to make sure that they're okay. You want to make sure that you maintain some kind of relationship where if they need you, you can be there for them. You can provide care, and they can provide care for you back. Then, of course, you can have different combinations: intimacy and passion without commitment. You can have intimacy and commitment without that passion, which is probably what you see predominantly in couples that have been married for a long period of time, where they no longer feel that really energetic passion for one another, but they are intimate, they share their life goals, and they're committed to one another. They don't want to see harm fall upon either of you. And then, of course, fatuous love would be something like passion and commitment, but no intimacy. That is, you're there for the person, and maybe you have sex with them a lot, but you don't really share much with them. You're not really emotionally connected to them. It's just that, well, you have sex, you rely on each other in that respect, and then you're there for each other if you need it. But beyond that, maybe you spend a lot of time separate from one another. Well, what's the help? What's the advantage of thinking about love in this way? Well, if we know that love is made up of different components, we can determine whether, if you look at two people, whether their types of love are matched for one another or they are different. Let's imagine the top scenario here. The bottom left was passion. If I feel passion towards someone and they feel passion back towards me, then we both have overlapping relationship motivations. We both want that kind of sexual, passionate, romantic chemistry. And we may agree, hey, you know what? I just really want to have sex. And maybe we can be friends with benefits or, hookup buddies, etc. But we're not looking for intimacy and we're not looking for commitment. When those motivations match, what you often see is that people are very satisfied with their relationship. You'd think that, most people want that commitment. Unless you have commitment, unless you have this intimacy, you're not going to be happy. But that's not how it works. It's really about whether the motivations are matched or not. To demonstrate this in another way, imagine that you have a passionate interest in another person, but they only have an intimate or committed interest in you, or an intimate or committed love towards you. Well, now you have a mismatch where one person wants to have sex and passion without the connection, and the other person really wants the connection, but maybe they're not really into the sex. Well, that's probably not going to work out. That's where you're going to see conflict. And so if you can identify these differences within yourself, you can identify your own motivations, what that allows you to do is then ask yourself, does another person have the same motivations as me? If they do, we're probably going to get along. And if they don't, maybe this isn't going to work in the way that I think it's going to work. I think it's very important for people to be aware of what motivations they have for being in the relationships that they seek. If you can do this for yourself, you'll be much happier. Case in point, there is a article that I often assign students. I didn't assign it this semester, but I will summarize it here, which looked at relationship satisfaction in consensually non-monogamous and monogamous relationships. So in relationships where there are two people who are exclusively involved with one another, they don't have sex or want romance with other people, versus consensual non-monogamy where people form multiple romantic or sexual bonds outside of just a pair bond between two people. Well, traditionally what the research shows is people in consensually non-monogamous relationships have less relationship satisfaction than people in monogamous relationships. And what Rodriguez did is he thought that there was going to be a moderating variable here. There's going to be something else that actually helps explain why these consensually non-monogamous people are reporting low satisfaction. And he thought that it was sociosexuality, which you'll remember is an interest in casual sex. Well, it happens that in most previous studies, the people who were sampled were those who were pretty restricted. They were low on sociosexuality. They had very little interest in casual sex. When he took those people into account and he measured people's sociosexuality, what he found was that, yes, people who are low on sociosexuality are more happy in monogamous relationships, but if you are high on sociosexuality, you are more satisfied in a consensually non-monogamous relationship than you are within a monogamous one. So that is, when your sociosexuality is matched to the relationship that you're in, then you are happier. If you want to have sex with multiple people, and then you are allowed to do that within the relationship, within the context of your relationship, you tend to be happier. And vice versa, of course. Again, emphasizing the importance of understanding someone's motivation for being in a relationship. If you can identify this, you can avoid a lot of trauma. It's not trauma, drama. Also trauma, potentially. All right. Very quickly, I want to mention some of the biological bases of love. I have talked about oxytocin before. This is a hormone that enhances pair bonding. This is released when you get into physical contact with someone and when you experience orgasm. It is the bonding hormone, whereby if you have more of it circulating within your body, you're more likely to form a monogamous kind of long-term pair bond, at least. Not necessarily monogamous, but long-term. Probably the best animal model of oxytocin are prairie voles. It turns out that there are two species of prairie voles, these kind of small rodent-like creatures, that one species has a very intact and active oxytocin system, and there's another species that does not. Otherwise, they're very similar. And so this has been a good model species for investigating the effect of oxytocin. And what they've found is that in the species with an oxytocin system that's active, you tend to see that these prairie voles will form long-term, often exclusive not romantic, but at least sexual relationships. Versus in the species without the oxytocin system, you tend to see more promiscuous mating. They might, a male and a female might get together, have sex, produce a child, but then they go their separate ways. And they may then hook up with other prairie voles. So oxytocin seems to determine to some degree your interest in monogamous versus non-monogamous mating. And then also brain activity contributes to the feeling of love. Love is a pleasant experience, and so it stimulates a part of the brain known as the dopamine reward system. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is released within your nervous system when you anticipate a reward. So love, likewise, is often a reward that you can anticipate when you have someone, that you're looking forward to seeing. Your dopamine reward system will activate and say, "Oh, I'm about to see this person. It's going to be so fun. I'm so excited to go on this date." Also, sexual arousal is controlled by brain activity. And I think that one aspect of love that many people might look over is that being in love and actively feeling love can often inhibit negative emotions like fear and sadness. So when you are with someone that you are affectionate with, not only do they make you feel good, but they might relieve or alleviate your anxiety, your worry. This is why, you come home from a bad day and all you want to do is cuddle. The reason for that is just being around someone can release certain neurotransmitters and hormones that collectively lead to this relief from fear and worry. So it's important to realize that one can be in love and maintain a bond with someone in part because they're alleviating sadness, and not even if they're not producing happiness. There's a distinction there. Okay. That concludes this section. Next time, we'll talk a little bit more about the dynamics of maintaining a long-term relationship. Once you have that love, how do you hang on to it?